So let's talk about human resources. What is HR actually for? Is its main job to protect the company's bottom line, to maximize productivity? Or has it turned into something else entirely, a kind of corporate police force that's all about culture and compliance? It's a real tension at the heart of the modern workplace, and believe me, it has very real consequences.
And that brings us to this quote, wow. It comes from a man who found himself right in the crosshairs of his own company's HR department. His name is Carl Borgneal, and his story really brings that whole conflict, partner versus police, into incredibly sharp focus.
So, how on earth did one question asked in a training session lead to a payout of nearly £500,000 and a completely ruined career? Okay, let's break down the story of Carl Borg-Neal.
The whole thing escalated so fast, it's pretty shocking. It all starts in July 2021. Bergneal is at a race education course. Now, the trainer specifically tells everyone it's a safe space where they can be clumsy. So he takes them at their word. He asks a question about intent versus effect, trying to understand how to handle offensive language. To make his point, he actually uses the full N-word. The reaction was immediate. What followed was a 6-month HR investigation that ended with him being fired. But 2 years later, an employment tribunal sided with him. Big time.
Okay, so here's the crucial part. The tribunal judge ruled that Lloyds Bank had totally mishandled the situation. First, they failed to consider that Borgneal is dyslexic, which can affect how he phrases things. And second, and this is key, they decided his question was well-intentioned. It was a clumsy, awkward attempt to learn, not an act of malice. This ruling just completely transforms one guy's personal nightmare into a massive case study on the proper role and judgment of HR.
And you see, Borgneal's story isn't just some isolated incident. It's really a symptom of this huge identity crisis happening across the entire people profession. It begs the question, what is HR even for in 2024? To even begin to answer that, you have to understand just how big it's gotten. Just look at this number. Between 2010 and 2024, the number of people working in HR in the United Kingdom shot up by a staggering 68%. I mean, think about that. For every 3 HR professionals back in 2010, there are now 5. This kind of explosive growth is pretty wild, especially when you see who this workforce now outnumbers. This chart really puts it all into perspective. With 476,000 professionals in the UK, the people profession now has more people in it than doctors and more than all types of lawyers combined. This is not some small back-office department anymore. It is a major economic and corporate force. And all of this growth has brought a fundamental conflict right out into the open. On the one hand, is HR's main job to serve the company by boosting productivity and profit? The bottom line. Or, on the other hand, has it evolved into this vehicle for social good, tasked with making our jobs kinder, more inclusive, and all about employee well-being? These two ideas are in a constant tug-of-war inside companies everywhere. So, to really get how we got here, we need to take a quick look back. Because the role of HR, well, it wasn't always this complicated or this powerful. Its origins were actually much, much simpler. It all kicked off way back in 1913 with something called the Welfare Workers Association. Their job was looking after basic conditions, like making sure female factory employees had washing facilities. Then, for most of the 20th century, it was just personnel, a purely administrative function handling hiring, payroll, firing. The big shift came in the late 90s, when HR got a rebrand as a strategic partner, a change agent meant to shape company culture. And by 2017, with a whopping 85% of UK companies having an HR director on the executive board, the move from the factory floor to the boardroom was complete. And now that HR is in the boardroom, its mandate has just exploded, really fueled by new laws, new social expectations, and a whole new industry of corporate services. A huge driver here was the Equality Act of 2010. This law laid out a list of protected characteristics that employers had to be careful about. Now, a lot of this was already law, but putting it all together like this basically created a massive boom in HR-led training courses, all designed to make sure every single employee was compliant and the company wouldn't get sued. And this flung the doors wide open for what you could call the well-being industrial complex. I mean, a whole market has sprung up selling services directly to HR. We're talking about apps that gamify well-being by giving you points for meditating, on-call psychologist platforms for your entire team, and even, I am not making this up, puppy therapy events to boost mental health at places like Google. But does all this training, does it actually work?
Well, according to Pamela Dow, a former senior civil servant, the answer is often a big no. She was in charge of training for the government, and she actually stopped using a very high-profile diversity coach, yep, the same one from the Lloyds Bank incident, because in her words, he's an ideologue. She says a lot of the training sold to HR is just unproven and, frankly, of bad quality. So, with all this new power and this growing, complex job description, what's the actual impact of HR on the people it's supposed to be serving? Well, the experiences out there are starkly different. On the one hand, HR can be a total lifeline. Take Victoria Schmeda. She was diagnosed with cancer right after starting a new job. She said her HR department was simply amazing. They cut her workload, gave her flexible projects, and were just constantly reassuring, making her feel like part of the team during an incredibly tough time. This is HR at its absolute best.
But for every story like that, there's another side. For a lot of employees, HR feels less like a support system and more like a department of overreach and policing.
I mean, just consider Georgina. She faced a formal investigation that she called the Spanish Inquisition just for liking a comment on LinkedIn that somebody else found offensive. She was cleared in the end, but only after months of stress. Or take Robert, a business owner who had to watch as underperforming managers filed what he called bogus bullying claims, forcing HR into this long, drawn-out investigation that he felt was just a tactic to avoid being fired.
So we come right back to that question we started with. When you add it all up, is HR's expanded focus on people, on culture, on well-being, is it coming at the expense of productivity?
Well, Pamela Dow certainly thinks so. She argues that all the endless training sessions, the listening circles, the cultural conversations, she calls it all decadent and indulgent, and says it's literally taking people away from doing their actual jobs. It's a pretty stark warning that maybe this big shift is part of why UK productivity has been so stagnant.
And yet, this focus is now baked right into the highest levels of corporate life. Get this, the CEO of Lloyds Bank and execs at other huge companies now have a chunk of their multi-million-pound bonuses tied directly to things like culture and colleague engagement scores that come from internal surveys. When the boss's paycheck depends on it, you can bet it's going to be a priority. Which leaves us with the ultimate question. It's not just for HR, it's for all of us. What are workplaces really for? Are they engines of economic output, or are they communities that are responsible for our social and emotional well-being? Because right now, we're trying to make them be both, and the tension in that identity crisis is something every single one of us has to navigate.